I'm Veronica Marshall at the Capitol. This week on Senate Spotlight, they say two heads are better than one, and this session will be testing that theory in the Senate, at least for a little while.
In this moment where there's challenge and there's controversy, how do we want to be perceived? And I would hope that the Senate is demonstrating that we're meeting the moment.
The focus really shouldn't be on what's best for Republicans, what's best for Democrats. The focus should be on what's best for the state, what's best for the people of Minnesota.
We talked to the Senate's co-presiding officers about their historic roles, meeting the moment, and what happens when the tie is broken. Plus, a tax break for seniors has been introduced. We have the details, and
the sooner that we think about what types of problems are going to be out there as adults, and the sooner we're able to solve them, the better.
Students come to the Capitol with their own ideas on how to solve national and international problems. That's all coming up.
Senate Spotlight is produced by the Minnesota Senate and Senate Media Services.
With the Senate evenly split between DFLers and Republicans, a power-sharing agreement was reached so the 94th legislature could start on time. Part of that arrangement replaced the Senate president position with two co-presiding officers. Here to speak with me about the new role is one of those officers, Senator Bobby Joe Champion. Senator, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me this morning. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing nicely, thank you.
All right, so talk to me. How does it feel to have been chosen by your caucus for this responsibility?
Well, let me first start by saying it was an honor when my caucus and the rest of the Senate elected me as Senate President. And for the past 2 years, I've been Senate President. That's when we had a one-vote majority. So it was 34-33. Until, unfortunately, recently we lost our dearly beloved Senator Disick back in December. I think it was December 27th, and that is what led to the vacancy. So now we're in a different moment in time where usually the Senate is not tied, because we have an odd number, and so we really face the notion that we have to share power. But now we're here, and we are making the best of this moment.
Being the president last session, you're familiar with the ebb and flow of the chamber. How will this session, at least the beginning, be different?
The only thing that's really different is for us to be identified as co-presiding officers, but we're both past presidents, or we both have been president. I have been the most recent president. Before I was president was Jeremy Miller, so he's the co-presiding officer. It is also okay, because Senator Miller and I have a relationship. We know each other. We're not new to the roles and positions, so that helps. But we're also guided by the great Secretary of the Senate, Tom Botter. We all have mutual respect for him. And so there's some pieces around the infrastructure that makes this easy. So when you asked me earlier, how did I feel about my caucus asking me to step to the plate and be the co-presiding officer, it was an honor and a privilege. Anytime that we can serve not only this important body, but also serve Minnesota, I see that as an honor.
Yeah, it seems with your experience and then Senator Miller's that you guys are just in a really wonderful position to get this going successfully, despite all of those unknowns. And speaking of that, at the end of the month, there will be a special election, and that will fill that vacant seat. How soon after that can we expect this agreement to end? Well,
the agreement will end when we get the 34th vote, whoever that is, and we believe it will be us, because the Senate District, which is Senate District 60, where Senator Disick, hailed from, is a heavy DFL district. But the important thing to know is, even before her death, one of the things that Senator Disick always wanted us to do, and we were always building on, is deepening our relationships with those who are across the aisle. Because even though we may have some ideological differences, we have to be people-centered. And so, at least from our perspective, it's important for us to be people-centered, not just see numbers, but see people. And how do we improve their quality of life? And so we want to do everything in our power to do that. So this agreement only enhances that, because it forces you to some degree, work on these things, especially right now, but even once January 28th rolls around, that's when the general election is. We think that the certification will happen no later than February 5th. It could be before then, but even once that event happens and we have to do some reorganizing, there will be some parts of our power sharing agreement that will survive even once we go forward, because we believe that it would be important and in the best interest of the Senate.
Right. So once that tie is broken and the power sharing agreement has ended, will one of you two co-presiding officers become the Senate president, or is there a different plan in place?
No, one of us will become Senate president. My hope is that that would be me. I like Jeremy Miller, but I'm not interested in him being president at this point, because that would mean that they would have the majority.
Okay. So this is a first for us, but in the case that a tie happens again in the Senate, do you think this will be the go-to model, going forward, or will other solutions be considered?
I think both things can be true, right? I think you can look at a past agreement that you've had before, and you look at the strengths and weaknesses of that agreement and see how you can build upon it. I believe that there's always room for improvement, and we should always look for ways and opportunities to improve. And so in the event that something happens in the future that requires us to power share again, I think we'll look at this and then we'll build on it and say, here's what worked and here's what would improve our working together for the people of Minnesota.
Now, Senator, during this time, there's been a big focus on bipartisanship and collaboration, and you mentioned some of the ideas in this power sharing agreement will continue after it's been dissolved. Talk to me about that. Will these themes continue, and how?
I think the theme of making sure we're people-centered will always continue, because that's a guiding principle, at least for us. Some of the things that are continued, such as committees, where there be closer in numbers, at least in certain committees. I think that would be important. But I think it's the spirit of it that should be something that we all embrace and that we all try to move forward around. I often say that people can look in the past and they can say, hey, here's what happened before that I didn't like. Well, you can stay, looking in the rearview mirror, or you can use the windshield that is in front of you, and you can say, but we must go forward and we must find ways to make sure that we can go forward together. So there'll be opportunities for us to strengthen our relationships. I am not only just a co-presiding officer right now, but I'm also co-chair of Jobs and Economic Development. And I've always thought it was important to engage and work much more closely with our GOP lead, who right now is Senator Draheim. So he is now my co-chair. Once we get the majority back, he'll still be the lead. But the spirit of working together, the spirit of looking at what's in the best interest of Minnesotans from a job and economic development, that'll go forward.
Senator, any final thoughts on this unique situation you find yourself in?
That we find ourselves in, because one thing about history is not just you alone. It is the fact that you are making history. It's historic for us to be in this power sharing agreement moment. It's historic for how we have come together to embrace it, but also understand that it's temporal. It's important that we're looking at guiding principles that will benefit not just us as an institution, like the Senate as an institution, but for the benefit of Minnesotans. That, to me, says that we have to step into the moment and meet the moment. It is a moment in time. Guess what? Because there are going to be books written about this unprecedented Senate time or this session. And how do we want our kids to view us? How do we want this society to judge us? And so to me, it is really interesting for us to be in this moment, and I embrace this moment because I embrace what life brings us. Martin Luther King, because we're now on the cups of Martin Luther King's birthday, which we celebrated January 20th, even though his birthday is January 15th. One of the main things that he said is the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands at the time of convenience and comfort, but it is where he stands at the time of challenge and controversy. So in this moment where there's challenge and there's controversy, how do we want to be perceived? And I would hope that the Senate is demonstrating that we're meeting the moment.
All right, Senator, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you.
Both of the Senate's co-presiding officers previously served as Senate President. DFL Senator Bobby Joe Champion was elected as the Senate President last session, while Republican Senator Jeremy Miller was the President of the Senate from 2019 through 2022. So, who better to navigate the new role and help preside over the Senate now than someone who has taken on the responsibility before? Here with me to talk about it is co-presiding officer, Senator Jeremy Miller. Senator, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, this is a unique and historic moment. How does that feel?
Unique and historic is a great way to describe it. It feels great. I think we're at a turning point here in the state of Minnesota, especially with what happened the last couple of years. There was a lot of trust has been lost with the lack of cooperation and the lack of working together. So instead of dwelling on the past or complaining about the past, I think it's a new opportunity to look forward, and with this historic moment, this very interesting moment in our state's history, I think it's a great time to move forward by working together. And it's still relatively early in the legislative session. We're a couple weeks in at this point, but I'm optimistic with what's going on here in the Minnesota Senate that there will be cooperation and collaboration through the rest of the session, and I think we can work together and get good things done for the people of Minnesota.
Now, Senator, I know that, one day you're in charge, the next day DFL Senator Bobby Joe Champion is in charge. Does it feel like a relay race where you're just handing off the responsibilities?
Not really. Senator Champion and I have been doing this for a long time, and him and I have a good relationship, and I'm confident that we'll continue to work together. And the focus really shouldn't be on what's best for Republicans, what's best for Democrats. The focus should be on what's best for the state, what's best for the people of Minnesota, and that's what I'm going to continue to be focused on. And again, I'm optimistic that we can work together and we can have that collaboration here in the Senate to get good things done for the people of Minnesota.
Now, the way you just said it makes it sound like you think that this is a benefit to the Senate and the people of Minnesota, but do you think having two co-presiding officers will slow any progress?
I don't think so. Co-presiding officers is something that I think is good for the Senate, co-committee chairs, co-leaders. I just think it's an opportunity for us to lead in the Senate. The Senate has a long history of being the chamber that works together, the chamber that has good dialogue on the issues. Look, Democrats and Republicans aren't always going to agree on the issues, but we can be respectful and we can have good conversations that ultimately will lead to better solutions. And we lost a little bit of that the last couple sessions, but I think moving forward, especially with this new arrangement in the Senate, that we're going to get some of that back, and we're going to rebuild some of the trust that was lost last year, rebuild some of those bridges that were torn down. Many of my colleagues would say that they were disappointed with how the end of last session played out. So again, I think this is an opportunity to move forward in a positive manner and really focus on what is best for Minnesotans.
Yeah, so talk to me about how your caucus is currently receiving this moment, your role and the power sharing agreement.
Well, I think it's great for the Senate. It's great for the people of Minnesota, and it's a huge responsibility for our members to come in and be co-chairs. For me to be co-president of the Senate, it's not a position that I take lightly. Of course, we have to maintain the rules and the decorum of the Senate, but I feel like there's a bigger responsibility there, and that is to help lead the Senate in a positive manner, in a new direction forward. Again, there was a lot of disappointment with the way that last session ended, and a lot of trust was lost. So I feel like it's my responsibility to help rebuild that trust. And I've been here for a while. This is my 15th year in the Minnesota Senate. I've served in a number of different roles throughout that time, and I'm confident that Senator Champion and I can work together, and we have, again, as I mentioned, we have a good relationship. I have a good relationship with many members on both sides of the aisle, and not only good relationships, but good friendships. When you're here, as long as I've been here, you have an opportunity to work together and get good things done, and the best way to get things done is to build those relationships and work across the aisle, work with both parties. And I've been very fortunate that I've been able to do that, and I'm looking forward to continuing to do that over the course of this legislative session.
Now, Senator, we've talked about your thoughts on this current situation, your caucus. Have you heard from the constituents, the public? What kind of feedback are you receiving?
I've heard a lot of positive feedback from the constituents that I have the great honor of representing in southeastern Minnesota. In fact, I was just home last night. It was my son's last home swim meet, and it was parents' night, so I snuck back home to Winona last night, and heard from a couple folks just last night how proud they are of the work that we're doing in the Senate. And of course, in the other chamber, it's a little more chaotic over there right now. So we're going to focus on doing our work in the Senate, and I think the people of Minnesota expect us to work together. Minnesota is not a deep blue state. It's certainly not a deep red state. It's a purple state, and Minnesotans expect us to work together and try to get things done, and that's what I'm committed to doing. And I think the way that the Senate has kicked off this year, Minnesotans appreciate that.
Now, this power sharing agreement, some people are saying it's bringing about balanced government. What does that mean to you?
Absolutely. People of Minnesota wanted us to restore balance in Minnesota. When you have one party in control, doesn't matter what party it is, what level, whether it's state or federal, oftentimes when there's one party in control, you go too far one way and you lose some of that balance, you lose some of those checks and balances. So I think Minnesotans are really, really excited about the restored balance in the state. And I can tell you what, I said it earlier, I'm optimistic that we're going to have a good session. Now, it's not going to come easy. There are a lot of challenges facing our state, and we have a large budget deficit that's looming in the not too distant future. So we have to take a look at spending. When you increase spending nearly 40%, it's unsustainable. And not only was spending increased by about 40%, but taxes and fees were also increased by an additional $10 billion. So that's unsustainable, and we're already starting to see that in the budget forecast. So we need to be more fiscally responsible as a state. We need to rein in spending, and I think we need to go line by line through the budget and take a look at what are needs of the state and then what are wants. And another area where we can find a significant amount of savings is going after waste, fraud, and abuse. And we've seen that there hasn't been a very good oversight from the administration when it comes to waste, fraud, and abuse. So I think you'll see the legislature get more involved, and hopefully we can not only rein in spending, but we can attack some of that waste, fraud, and abuse, so we can, at the end of the day, hopefully put more money back in the pockets of hardworking Minnesotans with some tax relief.
Senator, thank you for that. Going back to your role as a co-presiding officer, what do you want the legacy of that to be?
So what I'd like to see the legacy be is cooperation, collaboration, and working together. What can we do to focus on what's in the best interest of the people of Minnesota? That's what it's all about for me. I ran for this position because I wanted to help make a difference, and I believe that Senator Champion and I have both been called upon by our colleagues and entrusted by our colleagues to work together and do what's best for not only the Senate and to carry on the traditions of the chamber, but to really try to bring Democrats and Republicans together in the best interests of the people of Minnesota.
Senator, you mentioned that last session, a lot of people from your caucus felt unheard. This power sharing agreement has changed that for the beginning of this session, but it will end. Is there anything you can do now to ensure that all voices are heard throughout the session?
I think we're off to a good start, and I think continuing to work together and restore some of that balance is incredibly important. The way that the last session ended, it was devastating, I think, to the institution and to the Senate, not to mention the state of Minnesota, and a lot of trust was lost. And it's important that we try to rebuild that trust, and I'm committed to doing that instead of dwelling or complaining about the past. That won't do anybody any good. It certainly won't do the people of Minnesota any good. So I'm focused on let's listen, to each other, let's work together with each other, and let's move forward in a positive manner. And I think that's what the people of Minnesota expect, and I know it's what they deserve from their elected officials.
All right, Senator, any final thoughts on this topic?
Nothing further.
All right, well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and welcome to your new role here in the Minnesota Senate.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts on the Senate's solution to the tie? Do you think having 2 co-presiding officers is meeting the moment? Let us know your thoughts by leaving us a comment on our social media pages. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and X.
There's a new push to make Minnesota more affordable for seniors and more attractive for retirees. Republican Senator Jeremy Miller has introduced a bill to eliminate the state tax on Social Security benefits. Currently, Minnesota is one of 9 states that taxes Social Security income. The state taxes the same amount of Social Security benefits as the federal government does. Now, this isn't the first time efforts have been made at the Capitol to address the issue. In 2023, a bill was passed that eliminated the tax for about 3/4 of the state's seniors and raised the income threshold for partial tax breaks. Nearly $2 billion was spent to preserve homes and improve lives in Minnesota last year. The Senate's Housing and Homelessness Prevention Committee heard from the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency this week, which says that money served more than 73,000 households over the last federal fiscal year. The agency also says the 2023 session was historic, doubling the number of programs that Minnesota Housing administers. But the need for more housing help is increasing as federal funding for emergency rental assistance returns to pre-pandemic levels.
If you take a look at the number of months that are estimated that people are behind on rent, it's about, statewide, it's about a quarter million months of rent. The estimated need is about $350 million a year if we were to help people with all of their unpaid rent. The need is great. There's not a community, at large or small, north, south, east, or west in Minnesota that doesn't need more of what we do. And so I'm really looking forward to partnering with you as we figure out what the contributions of the 2025 legislative session will be for housing.
Of the programs that we passed in 23 and earlier, are they all up and running?
There's not a single thing that passed in 2023 that we aren't actively working on. Some of them are at various phases from done to in an RFP to an RFP is coming.
The agency can issue bonds and allocate low-income housing tax credits to create more housing in the state. It also works with service providers, developers, mortgage lenders, community organizations, and tribal and local governments to finance housing for low and moderate income Minnesotans, while also helping Minnesotans buy and fix up their homes. For the first time ever in Minnesota's history, there are more older adults than school-aged children, and the imbalance isn't likely to correct itself soon. There were just under 1 million school-aged children, that's ages 5 through 17, living in Minnesota in 2023. Over the next 15 to 20 years, a 5% reduction in that population is expected as a result of declining birth rates.
Was that taking into account that maybe a young family starting out in Georgia or Texas or another state might look at Minnesota as a great place to raise a family, and those numbers might not be as dire as maybe we're saying?
What we see historically is we're losing more people to other states than we gain. In particular, we're losing more young people.
The state demographer also told senators during the most recent Education Finance Committee meeting that the northern part of the state will see the largest and most consistent declines in school-aged children, while growth is projected for the central part of the state. Senate leaders came together to greet the newest class of interns. Republican caucus leader Senator Mark Johnson and DFL caucus leader Senator Aaron Murphy spoke to the interns about their backgrounds and their current roles. The interns also had the opportunity to ask questions. Throughout their time in the Senate this session, the interns will hear from a wide range of people and offices across the Capitol complex. Topics this year include a workshop on soft skills, an introduction to the legislative process with the Senate's nonpartisan staff, a panel on cybersecurity, and more. The Senate's internship program runs throughout the session, and applications for the new session are accepted in the fall. Researching, writing, presenting, and debating. Students from across the state came to the Capitol to showcase those skills as part of the YMCA's 71st annual Minnesota Youth in Government Conference.
It has been a challenge.
It's been very stressful, but it's been very grand, very complicated.
But that's not something that typically stops 16-year-old Zachary Smith.
I don't like to slouch from a challenge, but it really appealed to me at that time because I had these ideas swimming around in my head.
Those ideas were shaped into a proposal, which Zachary then submitted as part of the YMCA's Youth in Government National Issues Forum.
We bring our proposals in. We have spent hopefully a lot of time writing them. I think I spent 12 hours writing mine, and we bring them in, we debate them, we discuss them, and then we'll move on to the General Assembly where we will, instead of voting for them, see if we're going to pass them. I was nervous. I was so nervous. I was shaking a little bit. I was nervous but prepared, I felt.
Zachary's proposal takes on the final frontier.
For 60 years, humanity has pushed out beyond the confines of Earth. My proposal is for a space debris mandate. I wanted to write something that would put into law more procedures around it and make sure that we are safely exploring space and safely communicating with other nations about space.
The whole purpose of it is to discuss problems that we're seeing in our society and in our governments and in our countries, and to work as like a large think tank to figure out what kind of angles are there to these problems and analyzing them and finding solutions to that. And these types of processes of thinking are things that kids need to develop sooner, because as they get older, that's what they're going to take into their future endeavors.
This is Paramitha Pratha's third year in the program and her first serving in an elected position. She says the new role comes with new responsibilities, which is helping her hone new skills.
It's taught me a lot about how to deal with, unexpected things that come up. There's been a lot of unexpected things that come up when you're managing like hundreds of different delegates. There's also been disagreements between people who are kind of on my staff or like working with me. So learning how to manage all of those in a mature manner is a really important skill to have as a leader, but also as a person.
Something else she's picked up through the program, a deeper appreciation and understanding of how government works.
Throughout this experience in youth in government and also other type of government related experience that I've had, I'm really starting to realize that yes, like people might have different opinions, but at the end of the day, the reason they're doing this is because they want to help their communities. All of them tend to just have different opinions on how we actually get to that point.
And as our elected officials work to better their communities and our state as a whole, these junior delegates say they're up for that challenge as well.
I think a more educated population on how our government is run will make better decisions in the future. Will make more educated decisions for their own good, for their family's good, for their neighbors' good. I think ignorance about our government is what allows for corrupt people to engage in our government, to control our government. So the more educated people we can have in our government is amazing. And I think Minnesota is a great example of political education. I've never seen so many kids engaged with the government.
The National Issues Forum is part of the Minnesota YMCA's Youth in Government program, which also has students write bills, argue court cases, advocate for legislation on behalf of special interest groups, and serve as members of the press. That's all the time we have today. Thank you for joining us, and see you next time.